You are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke McKenna, but today's case is about kids who kill. The crazy case of Jesse Pomeroy. Now this is actually a new series I'm going to be starting on my channel if you guys would like it, and it was actually created by a subscriber, a Patreon, and a friend of mine named Stephanie. She came up with a name and the whole concept for this series, and I thought it was brilliant. You guys know how much I love talking about killer kids, and so if this is something you'd like to see more of, I was thinking of doing them more sporadically rather than rushing them all in one month, just kind of doing it every once in a while. But let me know what you think down below. However, this case is unlike any I have ever researched. I mean, the pure evilness of these crimes will shock you. Now I know that these are big claims, but I'm sure by the end of it that you will agree with me, and the most intriguing part is that we actually get to see inside this killer's mind and find out exactly what got him to this point. By the way, it's my absolute passion to tell these stories, and it would mean the world if you wanted to support me. All you have to do is make sure you are subscribed down below, give this video a big thumbs up, and then comment something nice down below as well. Now let's get back to the story. So it was 1871 in Massachusetts, and the Pomeroy family lived in Charlestown. Now this consisted of the parents, who were Thomas and Ruth Ann, and they had met when she was 15 and he was 20, and they had fallen in love. He would work at the Navy Yard to make money for the family, and they had two children by this point, a 14-year-old named Charles Jefferson and a 12-year-old named Jesse Harding. But this story isn't going to surround their family, even though one of them would be the reason why we know any of these other victims' names. However, on this channel we like to really focus on the victims as much as we can, so that is where we are going to start. We're still in Charlestown in 1871, and this was a town that was known to not be the best spot, and it also didn't have the best people. However, families made do with what they could, with the amount of money they could and the community they were surrounded by, but they wouldn't realize that the person causing the most terror would be the last person they expected. Now that December, two men would be walking along the Chelsea Creek when they would hear crying, and it was freezing outside. It was the middle of winter, and they began to get worried that possibly some little kid had been lost and had not been able to get home in this freezing cold climate. And so they went searching, and thankfully they did, because they got to this building and they could still hear the crying inside, and they would brace themselves before opening the door, and that is when they would find a little boy hanging by his wrist from a rope that was attached to the ceiling. He was naked, he was purple, and he was barely conscious. He had swelled hands, and there was no heat in this building, so he was really feeling that winter air. And like I said, he was barely conscious. They cut him down immediately, and he just kind of collapsed into their arms, and that's when they realized he was covered in bruises, and he was also a lot younger than they had first thought. He was about 4 years old, and his name would later be found to be William Billy Payne. Now, thankfully he lived. He was completely shaken up, and he had to be taken to the hospital, and he had that time that he needed to recover. But when he was talked to by investigators, he was so young. I mean, 4 years old is crazy young, so he didn't have a ton to say to them, and he also didn't have a description of who had done this to him. All he really said was that there was dark hair. Unfortunately, they could not catch this attacker with so little information, and the attacks would continue. Now, it's not known how long of a time period it was between the attack on William and this next attack, but it would be on a 7-year-old boy named Tracy Hayden. Now, Tracy would go missing, but he would later be found alive. He would be found naked, bound, and his 2 front teeth were missing. He had been tortured, but he was thankfully still alive, and he was brought to the hospital, and then he was asked what had happened, because of course he was a little bit older. So they hoped they could get a little more information out of him. However, it is a fine line between getting information and further traumatizing a victim. And with Tracy, they got out of him that this had all started because a bigger boy had come up to him and asked him if he wanted to go to the nearby circus with him. And of course, Tracy was like, yes, I would love to. He said this boy had brown hair, like a dark brown hair, and he went with him. However, when they were alone, that is when this boy's personality really changed and he became angry and aggressive. That is when this boy began to torture Tracy, threatening to cut off his private parts if he didn't do what he was told. Now, this was all that Tracy could really say about what had happened to him, and it made investigators wonder, was this because this boy was wearing some sort of disguise and not showing all of him, or was it because these boys were so traumatized by what had happened that they couldn't really remember, that they had repressed those memories? It was now 1872, around springtime, and an 8-year-old boy would go missing. However, before this was even found, before a search team could go out, Robert Mayer would come home like nothing had happened. However, something horrific had, and that would cause a search for this attacker to begin instead. And Robert had said that he had been lured by a dark-haired bigger boy, and this boy was offering candy to him, and he went with him. However, once again, once they got to an area that was more secluded, that is when Robert would be held underwater and almost to the point of drowning, but then he would be brought back up and knocked unconscious. When Robert came to, he was told to get naked by this boy, and the boy began to beat him with a stick. And every time this boy would hit him, Robert said he got even more excited. He began to cuss, and he was telling Robert he had to cuss too. And Robert really didn't think that he would live. And this boy began to say, you know, if he told anyone what happened, he would be killed, but he would be released. And so this attacker let him go. So now there were 3 victims, all young boys, who had all said they had been attacked by a brown-haired boy. The community wasn't dumb either. They knew a monster was on the loose. The rumors spread like wildfire, and all parents were keeping their boys indoors. They were locking the doors tight. And the problem was, a lot of parents were saying, you know, there was a dark-haired boy that they were saying was this monster, so look out for a dark-haired boy. However, rumors started that it was actually a red-haired boy, and I'm not sure where this originated from, but there were tons of rumors, and so parents were then telling their children, it's actually a red-haired boy, stay away from all redheads. And the problem was they were not looking for brown-haired boys and not steering clear from them, and so really that wasn't doing anything to help keep these kids safe. You know, a lot of people say at this point, how do the attacks continue? Because everyone is watching out for everyone, they know what to look for, and the problem is that families still have to live their lives. Parents have to go to work to support the family, children have to go to school or to daycare or whatever, and so it's not like everything can be stopped, unfortunately, just because there's a monster on the loose, because if we stopped our lives for every monster, we would never live. And children were still going to be the innocent and naive little individuals that they are, and so if they were offered candy, you know, you can teach them all you want about strangers, there's a chance they're not always going to remember that in the time of need. And a $500 reward was actually put out to catch this individual, but you know, it wasn't hard to believe that without catching this person, more attacks would occur. That July, 7-year-old Johnny Balge would disappear, and yet again he would come home completely fine, but he wasn't fine. he had been through something so horrible and he had to recall it to his family and to police. He said that he had gone with this brown-haired boy who had offered him some money that he couldn't pass up for his family, and so he went with him, and that is when he was stripped naked, bound, and beat over and over again. And he would go on to describe what this attacker was like when he was beating Johnny, and the way he was describing it, the adults kind of figured out that this attacker seemed to have orgasmed as he was doing so. Johnny was once again told that he would be killed if he spoke up, but thankfully he was brave enough to still tell people what had happened to him. And I'm sure this wasn't easy, especially because even though everybody was on the lookout, they still didn't know who to look out for. But thankfully, that's when the attacks seemed to stop. But did they really? You see, that same month it would be found that in South Boston, another 7-year-old boy would disappear as well, and he would once again come home before anyone really realized this. His name was George Pratt, and he would come home with an equally disturbing story, saying that he would be naked, bound, beaten, and released. This was a sadistic ritual that seemed to have no end, except this time George would come home with even more wounds, and not just mentally, but physically. You see, he had been stabbed as well as bitten. He had been bit on the cheek on his face and also on his buttocks, and this was a human bite. Well, as human as this attacker could be. Was this the same attacker? And if so, did that mean this attacker was escalating? And would it escalate further? That's what everyone was fearing, and all of these questions would soon get an answer. But not because this monster would be in a safe interrogation room, because more attacks would then occur. About a month later, Harry Austin, who was just 6 years old, would have the same thing happen to him. He'd be stripped, bound, beaten, he would be stabbed, and this time he would have something done to him that had before only been a threat, and that was that this attacker attempted to cut off his private parts. Thankfully, he didn't, and he ran away before he could get it done. Harry said that he was spooked by someone or something, and that's why he ran, and that is how Harry got away. But even though all of these victims weren't killed, this trauma that all of them would be going through when they got home and throughout the years after this would be so much more than just something to put to the side and say, they're fine, they'll be okay because they weren't killed. It's something that would really affect them for the rest of their lives. And unfortunately, this isn't where the victim list would end. 6 days later, Joseph Kennedy would be beaten and cut with a knife, and this time there was actually salt water put into his wounds to torture him further. This would make it sting, and it would really be horrific for a 5-year-old to be having done to them. He would be beaten, he would be cut with a knife, then he was bound to a tree and found near railroad tracks, but he had survived. Now, this was one of the youngest victims in this case. However, he would be the most helpful in this investigation because he would say that he noticed something very strange on this attacker, and this was that he had a very strange eye. One of them was completely white, like it was marble, and investigators immediately were on this like crazy. They were putting this information everywhere because before they just had that he had dark hair, which could be anybody. But if this attacker had something so prominent that was a white eye, this would be much easier to find the attacker. It was strange that none of the other victims had remembered such a prominent feature, but you know, when you're in a scared situation, maybe you don't see things, or maybe you don't remember things, and maybe he was even wearing some sort of mask or eye cover, you know, eye patch, something like that. So they just put that to the side, and they decided that they were going to go with their gut, that this white eye really could lead them to this monster. And The only problem was, where did they begin to search for a boy with a white eye? Well, investigators decided that because all these boys were quite young and they were calling the attacker a boy, that it must be a younger individual, and that would mean he was at least school age. So they took Joseph Kennedy to the schools nearby. They went to every school they could, and they went to every classroom, and Joseph would go and look into the eyes of every individual he could to, say if that was his attacker or not. And this is something that I don't think he was given enough credit for. I mean, to not only have gone through such a horrific thing and been able to speak up about it, but also to go and possibly confront the person who had done this to you is so incredibly brave. And he was only 5 years old. And so he would do this, but unfortunately they didn't find anybody that resembled this wide-eyed monster. And so they would go back to the police station and they would start talking to Joseph about other things he remembered, just to see if they could get anything else that could help them with the investigation. And that is when Joseph would just be sitting there talking, and he would look out the window and he would say, "That's the boy." And officers immediately jumped up and ran after this boy that Joseph was sitting there talking about, and this boy had just been looking into the police department. Officers chased him down the road before tackling him to the ground and dragging him back to the police department. This boy had walked into the police department, saw Joseph, and had run out. Now, his name was Jesse Pomeroy, and he was only 12 years old. He was 4 feet tall and 90 pounds. And he wasn't even yet a teen. But this victim was now saying he was a monster. Jesse denied everything and refused to talk to investigators, so they waited until midnight when he was asleep, and they ran in and they woke him up and they began to ask him a whole bunch of different questions. And at this point, he was groggy and he was told that he would spend 100 years in jail if he didn't tell the truth. And this is when a groggy Jesse would begin to confess to the attacks. But was this true, or was this just the police department getting a confession out of him, because he was 12, and many thought that just wasn't possible that he had done this. Had he attacked all these victims as a child himself? Well, all of the victims would be rounded up and taken to the police station, and that is when they would have to face their attacker. One by one, they would look at him in a lineup, and they would all but one, pick him as the attacker. This is all the investigators needed, and he was immediately charged with the crimes. And this was a super quick trial compared to how the justice system is today. And I think that day he was actually sentenced to be at a reformatory school for the next 6 years, because he was 12, so he would then be 18 and be graduating school at that point when he would be released. Now, you may be wondering why I titled this Kids Who Kill when Jesse hadn't killed anyone. Well, that's because this isn't the end of the story. But before we move forward, let's get a look at Jesse's past and what brought him to this point. I really tried searching for an account of who the victims were, their personalities, their souls, who they were beyond their trauma, because that is what matters more. However, because this is such an old case, I could not find it. The only reason we know anything about Jesse is because he would tell us himself in an autobiography. This means that you cannot take everything he has said about his past as being honest, because it is told from Jesse himself. And, with a monster like him, he doesn't seem all that truthful to me. Now, you could say that I'm giving him a spotlight to tell his own story. However, I look at it more like he is telling us who he believed he was, and to look into his mind in such a deep level to know why he did the things he did, what his upbringing was like, and how he thought about everything is, I think, quite informative as far as how we can see the differences or the similarities in other killers and how he can possibly prevent it in the future. So I do think it's interesting, but more importantly, it's educational to look into not even the facts that he says, because those can be, of course, lied about, but how he talks about why he did things and what made him do it. So let's get into that. So Jesse was born on November 19th, 1959, and up until about 6 years old, he says he doesn't really remember much of his childhood, and I don't think that's really that abnormal. I mean, I definitely don't remember when I was that young. I know some people can, but others don't. However, he did remember after that, and he said he lived at 78th Lexingwood was one of the first homes he remembered, and then he would go on to move several different times. Now, what he does remember is that he hated school so much, and he would often skip to go work with his dad at the Navy Yard because a ton of other kids did as well, and they would just help out working with their fathers there. He would either help out with his father whittling wood, or he would just play with the other boys to keep them distracted, whether they were younger or his age. Now, Jesse and his brother Charles were actually said to be very close, and they would often play together. They liked to go to the Navy Yard together, and they also liked to go to the nearby lake. And they had to sneak around a bit because their mom disapproved, of course, of them skipping school, but also just doing these kind of more dangerous things. However, their father encouraged it and said it was fun, and they were just little boys playing around. But their father was also said to be a bit of an alcoholic, and he allegedly would hit the boys when they were in trouble, and he would make them get naked and he would beat them. Now, some say this is a correlation to what Jesse would do later on, and you can say this is the reason why he would go on to be this monster. And I think that a lot of people say, yeah, that's it, we found the answer, that's the end. However, to me, I look at it more as that is how Jesse decided to be. That is how he grew up. Charles had the same thing happen to him, and he grew up to be a decent child, a decent adult. And I think that when we give killers and monsters an excuse of trauma, that isn't fair to everybody else who has experienced that trauma and who chooses every day to be a good person, to be better than those who traumatize them. And as horrible as it is that these boys were beat, and I'm not saying that that should be overlooked at all, it shouldn't also be used as an excuse. I do see the correlation in it, but I don't think it's the main reason or the reason why he would, become this attacker, and that he did it unknowingly. I think that's what I'm getting at more. He may have, he made the choice to do that. He liked something about it a little too much, and he made that choice to begin killing in the same way he had allegedly been hurt as a child. Now, he said in this autobiography that he was a mixture of good and bad in school. However, on all other accounts, it was found he was actually quite bad in school, and the teachers could not handle him. They were constantly shuffling him around to different classrooms, hoping some other teacher could take him because they didn't know what to do with him. He would yell out in class. He wouldn't do his work. He would read these horrific, graphic horror novels to the other young children that weren't being allowed to hear that kind of stuff. Teachers began to tell his mother that he had some serious behavior problems and he needed to be taken out of school and something needed to be done with him. However, she said that no problems were happening and that Jesse was completely fine, and she refused to admit that any of this was happening. But Jesse would actually admit himself that he had even blown off a firecracker at school and caused everybody to be in a panic, and he was confused at why he got in trouble. Now, it was said he was a pretty rebellious kid and he didn't get along with any children. His mother said that that was because he was bullied by his peers and he didn't fit in with them, so they didn't want to be his friend. However, his teachers would say he actually was the one to bully his own peers and that they didn't want to be with him because he was mean. Interestingly enough, Jesse would go on to tell us a story about around this time in his life when he and Charles would go fishing one day, and That is when they would be talking, having a good time. Charles would try to cast the line and his hook would be embedded in Jesse's face. It was like below the left eye. He could have very easily been blinded, and he did not cry at all. In fact, he didn't really feel anything. He said, he didn't understand why everyone else was panicking, and they went to the doctor, and he sat still and dry-eyed, and the doctor just took out the hook like it was something easy. Jesse in the autobiography was wondering if this is why he didn't show any emotion to that day, and to me, he was basically saying that he didn't show any emotion, but that didn't mean he didn't have any. However, he never confirmed he did have emotion. He just said it wasn't confirmed he didn't have any. I think this is the kind of manipulation that people can move past and not really see, because of course, he's acknowledging the fact that he doesn't have emotion, and he has a set time period where he thinks it goes back to, and so they overlook the fact that he didn't ever admit he even had emotion at all. You just didn't hear that part because you were focusing on something else, and that is what a manipulative person can do. One of the neighbors was actually said to come forward saying that Jesse was constantly running around screaming with his hands over his head, just being completely erratic. And from all of this combined, it really started to make me wonder if Jesse had a bit of fetal alcohol syndrome. Now, this is something we talked about in depth in the David Michael Kruger case, which I will link down below for you. But in essence, that is when a baby will be in the womb and the mom will be drinking pretty much excessively, or even a little bit. It doesn't have to be a ton, and this can really change the brain and how it works and how this baby is. It can cause numerous mental and physical delays and physical differences, and it can make individuals aggressive, and they can lack empathy. That's one of the huge ones. But they also have these features that really kind of stand out to people if you know what to look for, such as these strange kind of lower set ears. There's a ton. We talked about them in that case, and you can also do some more research into it. But Jesse was said to have quite a bigger head. In fact, many of the boys said he was a bigger boy, but when they elaborated, they said his head was really the biggest part. And also that he had just large features in general, large eyes, large nose, large mouth. Just his head. He was a pretty small boy other than his head. Now, his father was said to be an alcoholic. So was his mother one at that point as well? Did she drink and do that while she was pregnant? I mean, I know especially back then they wouldn't have known the repercussion of drinking while pregnant. Maybe she had no idea. Maybe she wasn't doing it on purpose, and maybe she just didn't think it would affect a child how it does, because it affects them truly. He had great memories from his childhood that he would talk about in this autobiography, and it always seemed that every great memory he had would end with some sort of awful tragedy, and those were the only ones he remembered. He had once said that he went to Boston for his Sunday school group. They had all gone there, and all he remembered from the trip was that a man had gotten hit by the train that they were on and was killed on the tracks. And he talked about how it was hard for him, but he dealt with it. But the girls were crying, and that was okay because they were the weaker sex. Jesse would admit that his troubles began when the attacks started, and he also confirmed that his family had moved from Charlestown to South Boston when the attacks moved as well, further confirming that he was the one doing it. Now, it was said to be because his mother and father got a divorce and the two boys went with their mother to South Boston. It had also been said that Jesse's family could not have pets. They would not get pets, and this was because they had once had birds, and they had come home and their heads had been pulled off, and they all knew that it had been Jesse. A neighbor of theirs had also had a cat and had feared that Jesse had done something to it, and had told his mother that she believed that, and that is when allegedly his mother found him holding the dead kitten and the knife. He also said that when Joseph Kennedy and the officer went to all the schools, they did go to his school, that he had hit his head and Joseph didn't see him. But then later on, he would also say that Joseph looked him right in the face and didn't say anything. So at this point, I'm not sure what's really the truth. Jesse said when he was questioned, he was screamed at, yelled all sorts of names, and told information about a crime scene that an innocent boy shouldn't have been told. He said the only thing he said was to be left alone, and from that, they believed he was guilty. He said he never confessed, was caught in a lie, or contradicted himself, and yet they believed that he had been the one to do all of this. But at midnight, when the officers all ran in and were swearing at him to get him to confess, he just decided he would, and he was half awake, terrified, didn't remember the conversation, and he would tell them what they wanted to hear. He said the only reason he knew all this information was because he'd pieced it together from what the officers had been talking about in front of him or what he had overheard, and what he hadn't overheard he denied. Jesse would recall when the victims would come in and identify him, and he would say that all but one of them, who was Tracy Hayden, would say it was him, and Tracy had to look at the lineup 3 different times before finally saying that it was Jesse because of his eye. He said that none of them remembered what the attacker was wearing or what his voice sounded like. Now, this could just be how people talked back in the 1800s, but Jesse would write something that sounded super weird to me, and that was that he had considered the reasons he had not done those things, as in the attacks, as in he didn't know if he was guilty or not. Now, remember when I told you that the trial happened quickly? Well, I was right. It did happen that same day, and Jesse said he was not allowed to testify, and he was found guilty. Now, he said that this wasn't a fair trial and that it happened so quickly and he couldn't do anything about it. He was put into the reformatory school September 24th of 1972, and that puts us right back to where we were. And as I told you, we weren't done. You see, Jesse was a model prisoner at the Westboro House, which was the reformatory school, and he did as he was told. The only strange thing that they found about him was that he would often ask the other prisoners there with him what they had done to get in there. He wanted it in detail, and he also would want to know if any of them got in trouble, what the people did to them, the people, watching over them, what exactly they did to punish them. He wanted to know all the details, and after a while he would be transferred from braiding chairs, which was his job there, to watching the other children who were younger than him. Now, who in their right mind thought that a child who attacked other children would be good as a babysitter for them? I'm not sure. That's baffling to me, but the other children knew who he was, what he had done, and really did try to steer clear of him as much as they could. At this time, his mother was begging for his return, saying he was too young to have done any of this, and they also needed him at home to help work. And she would say he was completely innocent. Now, unfortunately, the combination of that and the fact that he was doing well at the reformatory meant that he would be released after 1.5 years there when he was supposed to spend 6 years. He was to work with his mother at her new dressmaking shop and at his brother Charles' newsstand, and the staff at the reformatory didn't believe he needed to be there any longer, and it seems to me that they were quite honestly manipulated by him. And a man who had worked for the State Board of Charity had actually written a letter to get him released because he felt bad for Jesse's mother, who was having to work alone without her son. This man believed that bringing Jesse back home would fix him better than a structured state school, and sadly, this is what many still believe today, that love and family can fix a troubled soul, and that anger and violence and hatred can be diminished by that love. And as sad as it is, that's not the case, and it does not fix it. And we see time and time again that it's not true. This would be proven to be a big mistake. The police had no idea that he was being released, and 6 weeks later, they would realize. You see, it was March 18th, 1873 now, and Katie Mary Curran would go to the local shops to buy a notebook. She was given money by her mom and asked if she could go run and get a notebook. Her mom said yes, but she needed to come right back. She was only 10 years old. She didn't need to be out on her own. She just seemed like a really good mother, and even back in those days when they just sent their children out to do anything, she really wanted her child to come home as soon as possible and be safe. An hour later, Katie Mary was still not back, and her mother knew she wouldn't disobey her like that, so she went out to search, and she had gone to the different shops. She had gone to a few. She had talked to store managers, tried to like piece together her timeline of events. And these other store managers were saying, you know, she came in here, but we don't have notebooks, so I sent her down to the next store. And they were just continuing to say that until she got to the Pomeroy's shop. That's right, the Pomeroy. That was the last time she would be spotted, and that is when a search would ensue with $500 for a reward, yet Katie was not found. And of course, the Pomeroy's, being the last shop that she was seen in, was searched. But like I said, they didn't know that Jesse, who had previously been convicted of attacking children, was released. So they just thought this was an innocent business. It was now April 23rd. It was 5 weeks later, and two boys who would be down by the lake picking out shells and clams would be shocked to discover a body nearby. They would immediately run to get an officer, like they had been always taught to do, and this officer automatically knew who this was. However, when he got to the body, he was extremely confused because this was the body of a boy. This boy was as young as 4 years old, was nude on his back with 18 stab wounds to the chest. He had a punctured eye, and his private parts had been attempted to be cut off. He had also been burned, and he would later be identified as Horace Millen. Now, he had gone missing after his mother had sent him to the shops to get a sweet bun, and it was just at the corner bakery, wasn't going to be that far. And once again, when he didn't return, that is when his mother went to look for him and could not find him anywhere, and the search didn't come up with anything either. Horace had last been seen at about 10:30 talking to a woman and her daughter, and the officers were baffled because this was so horrific. This was torture, and the last time they had seen anything even remotely like this was years prior, when there was this boy torturer that was what he was referred to as well as the Red Devil, but he had been locked away in a reformatory, right? Well, the officers would go and make sure that he was still locked away, and that's when they would find out the truth. Now they had their prime suspect, but if this was Jesse, that meant his crimes had escalated, and he had gone from just attacking and releasing to killing. And witnesses were asked to come forward about what they had seen about, Horace that day before he disappeared. And one woman did come forward saying she had seen a bigger boy wearing a cap that was by this bakery, and they held hands, the two boys, as they walked down to the beach, which is where Horace would be found. With that, investigators knew they needed to pay a visit to Jesse, and they would do so. When they got there, he was wearing a cap. He also had scratches on his neck and his face, which he said he got from shaving, and he also had a red stain on his clothing. Now, they brought him in for questioning, and they would also look at his boots that appeared to have mud on them. And of course, down by this lake, there was this marsh, and that's where Horace's body was found, in kind of this muddy area. So they decided to take the boots and test it to the mud down by this area by the body, and it was a match. In his vest pocket, they also found a knife. He had been asked where his vest was. He said at home, and there was also the knife in there that he had always carried. Now, he had denied everything until they had asked him if he killed the boy without knowing. And that is when he said, "I don't know. I might. I guess I did. I'm sorry. I don't want my mother to know." They now had Horace's killer and a confession, but what Jesse would say next would throw them into a whole new investigation, because he would say to the officers that they just wanted the money from the reward. And that's when they said there was no reward for Horace. So no, that's not true. And he said, but there's a reward for the girl. Did he mean Katie Marie Curran? Because she was still missing and it had been a month since her disappearance, but they couldn't get anything more out of Jesse. He wouldn't say anything else, but he wouldn't need to. 3 months later, the police would get a call about an odor at a grocer's new store that he was setting up. He had workers there, and workers were sent down there to clean out the basement, all this trash, and that is when they would find the body of Katie Mary Curran. And this building had previously belonged to none other than the Pomeroys. Katie Mary had a severed head, stab wounds, broken bones, and a fractured skull that was thought to be her cause of death. Investigators had already known Jesse had done this, and now they had proof. They went to the jail cell where he was staying to await Horace's murder trial, and once again, Jesse denied having anything to do with it. That is, until he was told that his mother and brother were being arrested because they were the ones that owned the store at that time, and if he didn't confess, his mother would be charged with murder. He then said he slashed Katie Mary's neck because he wanted to see how she would act. Jesse was 16 years old now, and he would go to trial, and the jury would say he was too young for premeditated murder, but he was then convicted of 2 counts of murder in the first degree and sentenced to the death penalty, which back then was to hanging. His defense had tried and failed for the insanity plea, so he was going to get the death sentence. However, the governor refused to sign it, saying he was too young for the death penalty, and ultimately he was given a life sentence in solitary confinement instead. This is where he would be for 40 years, and while behind bars, he would confess to 27 murders, and 12 bodies would be found around his home at the time, but none of these could be confirmed. And during his confinement, he would actually try to escape 10 different times with different tools and things that he could make to try to escape. Now, Jesse would also talk in his autobiography about his time at the reformatory, as well as what happened with these murders and afterwards. And he would say that at the reformatory, they had to wake up at 5 a.m., make their bed, wash up. They would then have free time before going to work and school. That it was pretty much a regular life in there. And that the boys with behavioral problems were put in the lodge, basically like locked up in little jail cells. And then the ones that were really bad were put in the dungeon below. He said he was on his best behavior. He was always telling on boys for their wrongdoings. He also didn't escape when a whole bunch of other people did, or they did try to. They didn't actually escape. But he said he loved it at this place. He was sad to go, and he had never been punished there. So he decided he was going to start acting like he did at the school when he got home so the police wouldn't watch him. So he said that's what he did, that he never harmed anybody after this. That the day he heard of Katie Mary Curran's disappearance, it was actually the night after, and he was carrying newspapers around, and a homeowner that he gave one to had talked to him about it and told him the whole story, and Jesse said that's the first time he had ever heard of it. Jesse then went on to say that he had heard a story that Katie Mary was actually going to a store named Tobin's, but she was put into a carriage by a man and he drove away, and that people thought she was crying because she was being taken to a convent. He also said that when Horace's body was found, officers came to talk to him at 10 p.m. with nothing other than suspicion to go on. He had told them that he worked at the store that morning, then he went to Boston to get newspapers, and then he went back to the store to freshen up and relax before going out and actually handing them out. He went on and on about what he smelled, what he saw, what he heard that day for every hour. I mean, this went on forever in his autobiography. And to me, I mean, that can be one of the biggest signs of lying, is to over-exaggerate and to over-speak and to just make it some elaborate thing instead of just saying it simply. He said he had nothing to do with this murder. Now, Jesse told his mom not to fret because he hadn't done anything. He said his boots were muddy because he walked all over town delivering newspapers, and he was kept up until 2 a.m. being questioned. That's when they told him it was better to confess, and he said he might have done it. But Jesse would say that the witness who had seen Horace and this other boy holding hands walking to the beach had come in and, done the lineup, and she or he, I guess whoever the witness was, could not identify Jesse as the actual person that had been with Horace. And this was not at first, but Jesse would still be charged with murder, and he would plead not guilty as he sat in jail awaiting trial. That is when Katie Mary's body would be found, and Jesse's mother and brother would also be arrested. He said that they only believed he was guilty of her murder because they thought he was guilty of Horace's murder, and he didn't know why the new owner of the store wasn't questioned about her body being there. But he said that's why he admitted to the murders, was because of his family and to spare them being charged with it. And his confession said that Katie Mary had walked into the store that day to buy a notebook. He said they didn't have one up there, but they did have one in the basement, and he would follow her down there, where he would then slit her throat. Jesse said he only knew these things that he confessed because he had heard them from other officers, but he wasn't going to say everything he heard because he also knew that killers trying to get the insanity plea couldn't remember everything, so he wasn't going to say everything. He said he even decided to say he had a funny feeling in his head that went side to side because that's what another killer that got the insanity plea had said as well. That's when he said he figured if he admitted to the murder of Katie Mary, he might as well admit to all of the others, and that included the other boys he attacked previously. He said that it started about 12 and that he would walk up to these boys and he really did have good intentions and that he would become friends with them, but when he got them alone, like an impulse would come over him, and that's when he would attack. He said he couldn't help doing it and forgot what happened immediately after, but he could remember, becoming friends with him and meeting them at first. He also would tell investigators he got headaches right before that and often, and it was like a pain behind his ear. He said he got an overwhelming urge to do something to hurt or kill these children, and he couldn't help but doing it, but he also didn't plan it. Yet in the book, he began to say that he only said all this due to the pressure and that he had been talked to about it so long that he had really started to believe that he was the one who had done all this, and it was reality, even though he knew he didn't do anything. And he said he didn't plead not guilty because he didn't want his family to be charged instead. He would say that the people who wanted to execute him instead of just giving him a life sentence were the women who just feared for their boys' lives and were just basically not knowledgeable of the law. Now, this was a second time of him looking down upon the females. This almost leads me to believe that if Jesse had gotten older and had never been caught, he would have begun to torture and kill women as well. I think that as long as they were weaker than him, he believed that they could be killed, could be attacked. And I think that he often went after really young boys because they were easy to befriend, they were easy to attack, but his first kill was actually a little girl. And so I don't think, gender would necessarily be a factor, but he would look more at who was weak, and in his eyes, females were. So unfortunately, I do think as he got older, he would have turned to an MO of females instead of still kids. I think it was more about weaker than him than just being kids, although I could be completely wrong. Jesse also said if he had a cruelty within him, it was born there, and that he didn't know a time when it would have started or when it was any different than how he had always felt. Now, one thing he could possibly say to point to why he was this way was that he had lots of headaches when he was younger, but that was about it. And maybe Jesse didn't remember these crimes. Maybe he did black out, but that doesn't make him innocent. Something I found strange was that over and over again he wanted to reiterate that he hadn't hurt this kitten, that it had come out that he had killed and had been walking with a knife. He said it over and over again, and I don't really know why it is, but I just found it strange and found it definitely something that he made sure was acknowledged. Now, he also said that he had learned from a young age to stop emotions in bad situations and to keep them inside. But he said he still had them inside. Now, Was that true? Jesse said that he was just a scared little boy and a child when he was brought in for questioning. And, yes, he's a child, but many child killers do exist. And I think that Jesse is probably one of the first recorded ones. And so I think a lot of people didn't know that and didn't recognize that. I mean, even still today, they don't. But you can say the poor criminal is only a kid until you see what the monster can really do. And then it doesn't matter how many years they've been on this earth. You're still going to be scared of them. Now, from this writing, it's about 3 hours long if you listen to it. And you can tell that Jesse really does have a way with his words. He's very persuasive in the way he makes you think. And it's almost like you believe him over the facts in this case. And I think that's the most dangerous type of killer. The ones you never see coming. This autobiography was actually written in 2 weeks after he was put in solitary confinement, and it was also sent out to the Boston Sunday Times to be published. It would be published within 2 weeks, and at this time, Jesse would also try to escape from the Charlestown State Prison for the first time. He would fail at this, and he would try again 4 more times, all still unsuccessful. Until in 1887, he would have been in there for 11 years at this point, and he would try to use the gas line in there and redirect it to get out. I'm not sure what his exact plan was, but ultimately it didn't work. It only blinded him in one of his eyes. This wouldn't stop him though, and he would try to escape 3 more times. He would begin to publish poetry and nonfiction in the prison newspapers at this time, and by 1917, after 40 years of being in confinement, he would actually be released. But not to the public, only to the general prison population. And at first, he had fought this. He really didn't want to. He didn't want to be around them. He was fine. But after so many years of being alone, he was ready to get out and be with people. 12 years after this, Jesse was 71, and he would be sent to the prison hospital due to his health. Now, he did not want to go there, did not want to leave his home that he had known his whole life, and he had to be drugged there, and he would actually see a car for the first time at this point and be driven to this hospital, because prior to this, they didn't have any. Now, he would try to escape this hospital, but 3 years later, when he was 74 years old, he would pass away. Now, one thing that really gets to me about this case is Jesse's family, and his mother really seemed to want the world to know he was innocent. But to me, it didn't seem like she really believed he was innocent, only that she wanted other people to think that. And her image appeared to be more important than the other children's safety. Some say that she knew that he was the one attacking all of those boys, and that is why they moved to South Boston, and she was the one to get him out of the reformatory. And then 6 weeks later, there would be a body in the shop. Then a body would be found in the very shop that she had sold a month prior, and it would be smelling at that point, so you'd think it would have been smelling prior. So did she know about the body as well? Did the whole family know what he had done and covered it up? I mean, I understand parents wanting to think the best of their children and wanting other people to think the best of them too, but there's also a certain responsibility for the safety of others that you have to worry about. And now I will say that many families try to get help and are denied that help, and that is horrific because they are the ones who see every single day what this person is like, what it's like living with them, and if they ask for help, they need to be given that. And that's not what I'm talking about at all. But luckily in this case, Jesse was brought in. He was looked at. He was, given that help. And she seemed to be the one that continually said, no, they're lying. He's innocent. He needs to be released, just because of her image. I think the reformatory also made a huge mistake in believing that because he hadn't shown any aggressive behavior while in this reformatory that he was completely fine. I think that in a lot of these facilities, it's really hard to kind of monitor what a person is like in the real world. I think they have such a structured, set environment, and they see every single day what can happen, the punishment, the cells, and even if it's not as horrific as I'm sure it is back then, even today, they have that structured environment that sometimes they need. And so to monitor a child or any individual in these facilities and say, yeah, they're doing fine, and then just throw them back in the real world, that's never going to work because it's two completely different environments. So when you say, oh, they haven't harmed anyone in a week, they're ready to go home, that's just setting them up for failure. And I think that's ultimately what everyone did to Horace and to Katie Mary. They failed them because this should have never happened. And he should have never been released before he was. Please let me know what you think about this being a series, and thank you again to Stephanie. I love you so much and I'm so grateful for you, and this is just such a wonderful idea and I'm so excited to do more if that's what you guys want. But make sure to thumbs up if you haven't already, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one because it is a very old one, but I think very important to hear about, and especially interesting because of the autobiography. But don't ever forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay, bye.